I didn't plan to make a scene. That was never my role, not then. Not now. My name is Hannah Ellis, and I showed up to my sister Blair's wedding quietly, like a background hum to her symphony. I wore a soft gray dress that skimmed my knees, carried a gift wrapped in understated gold foil, and smiled the way you do when you're used to disappearing in plain sight. It wasn't bitterness that kept me subdued, it was habit. Growing up, Blair had been the star, the louder one, the shinier one, the sister who commanded a room with the confidence of someone who expected to be adored. I learned early that the best way to avoid her wrath was to shrink myself. Be helpful, be quiet, don't outshine. And so, I arrived at the wedding with every intention of honoring her moment. I kept to the edges during the rehearsal dinner. I didn't object when the planner asked me to help organize seating cards. I even bit my tongue when one of Blair's bridesmaids accidentally spilled Prosecco on my skirt and giggled about how classic it was of me not to have a backup dress. I let it all roll off, the way I always had, but something felt different this time. Maybe it was the tightness in Blair's smile when she first saw me, or the way her eyes narrowed as if she were scanning me for flaws she could name before I said a word. Maybe it was the fact that I'd finally stopped apologizing for being smart, for being capable, for being someone who, outside of her shadow, had built a life that mattered. Still, I didn't want to fight. I stood by the floral arch, complimented her gown, posed for a few photos. When she whispered under her breath that I looked like a discount funeral date, I just smiled and turned away. I knew her jabs weren't about me, not really. They never had been. But that day, something in the air was heavy and sharp, like a storm just waiting for one small crack to tear open the sky, and it would. Just not the way anyone expected. People talk about sisters like they're born best friends, like there's some built-in magic to growing up side by side. And maybe for some, that's true. But for Blair and me, it was more like growing up in parallel universes that occasionally crashed into each other. Blair was 3 years older, but she made it feel like 30. She was loud and lovely, with the kind of charisma that made people bend toward her like sunflowers. I was quiet and observant, bookish, the kind of child who memorized schedules and stayed out of the way. Our parents, especially our mother, called her our little firecracker. I was the dependable one. That's code for invisible. It was never open war between us. Not exactly, but every compliment I got seemed to trigger something in her. Every achievement I reached became a challenge she felt she had to beat, even when I wasn't competing. When I made honor roll, she auditioned for 3 school plays and landed the lead in 2. When I got into law school, she announced she was starting her own online business, never mind that she barely finished her undergrad. I cheered her on anyway. I always did. But under her smiles were jabs. Soft, almost imperceptible ones. You're so good at reading people, Hannah. It's probably because you were always on the outside looking in. I could never work in something so boring, contracts, ugh. But you love that dry stuff. You're like the human version of chamomile. Tea, calming, beige, safe, all said with a laugh, a wink, a cocktail in hand. And I let her say those things because I thought that was what love between sisters was supposed to look like. A little teasing, a little bruising, nothing that didn't fade. But weddings have a way of bringing old tensions into the harshest light. Everything's more heightened: emotions, expectations, insecurities. And I could see it in her eyes every time she looked at me that day. I wasn't just her sister. I was a mirror she didn't want to face. I was a witness to everything she'd worked so hard to hide under layers of white tulle and manicured perfection. She needed me to play my role, the quiet shadow. But something deep in me had finally started to glow, and the veil between us was beginning to tear. The morning of the wedding was soft and golden. Sunlight spilled across the courtyard, catching on the edges of the champagne flutes already being set out by the staff. Everything looked perfect, the kind of curated beauty Blair had always been obsessed with: floral arrangements in cream and blush, tiny candles floating in crystal bowls, linen napkins folded into roses. I moved through it all like a ghost. People smiled at me, in that polite way reserved for the other sister. Not unkind, just uninterested. I was used to that. I sipped orange juice slowly, smiled when spoken to, offered to help the planner when one of the groomsmen went missing. I didn't expect thanks. I wasn't looking for a spotlight. I just didn't want to make waves, but I saw them, the waves. I mean, beneath the surface of Blair's picture-perfect bridal morning. Her laugh was louder than usual, edged with something brittle. She snapped at the hairstylist when a curl didn't hold. She asked 3 different bridesmaids if her dress looked tight, then brushed off their reassurances like lint. Even her smile, that big open one she'd practiced in every mirror since we were kids, felt stretched to thin, like a balloon tied to tight and ready to pop. I caught her staring at me a few times. Not the usual glance over kind of stare. No, this was sharp and weighted, like she was cataloging something she didn't like. My hair pulled back simply. The dress I chose, pale slate blue and modest, not even close to white, but still, her eyes lingered, like she was trying to find something wrong. Like my presence itself was a problem she hadn't anticipated. Her bridesmaids didn't help. They circled her like satellites, but every orbit brushed past me with a passive-aggressive comment. You always dress so neutral. I love how you don't care what people think, so freeing. Hannah, do you ever wear anything fun? All with those sugary smiles. I smiled back. Not because it didn't sting, but because I'd learned that silence could be its own armor. I told myself none of it mattered. This was Blair's day. I could take a few hits, nod through the fake sweetness, stay on the edge of every photo. I could keep the peace, just like I always had. But peace isn't always quiet. Sometimes it hums beneath the surface, waiting for the crack. I found her alone in the dressing room. Not by design. I had gone looking for a safety pin, something small and mundane to fix a hem of a tablecloth that had started to sag. The kind of task no one asked me to do, but that I volunteered for anyway, because it gave me something to focus on, something other than the way I didn't quite fit. She was in front of the mirror when I stepped inside, her back to me. Her dress shimmered in the morning light, lace and silk, fitted and flawless. She looked like a painting, but her hands were shaking. I could see it in the way she fidgeted with the neckline, adjusting what didn't need adjusting. She caught my reflection behind hers and froze. "You're not supposed to be in here," she said flatly, still not turning around. "I'm just grabbing something," I replied, already moving toward the vanity drawer. A long silence stretched between us, heavy with everything we hadn't said for years. Then, finally, she turned. "Did you wear that on purpose?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but sharp, like the edge of a knife dragged across silk. "What? That color, that cut, it's so tasteful, so understated. I'm surprised you didn't come in a robe and halo." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I blinked. I didn't think my dress would be a problem. "It's not." She tilted her head. "It's just very you." I didn't answer. What was there to say? That I'd agonized over what to wear. That I'd chosen something specifically so I wouldn't overshadow her, so I'd disappear into the crowd like a well-behaved afterthought. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "You just can't help it, can you? Always needing to be better, smarter, calmer. It's exhausting." I looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the flawless makeup, the curled lashes, the painted lips, there was something unraveling. Fear, insecurity. A girl in a white dress still measuring herself against a sister she swore she didn't envy. "I'm not here to compete with you, Blair," I said quietly. "But you always win," she whispered. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about today. It never was. By the time the photographer called everyone to the garden steps for the formal portraits, the sun was high and blinding. The breeze had picked up just enough to toss curls out of place and stir the chiffon of gowns into nervous little flutters. Blair stood at the top of the steps like a queen on the edge of her throne, bouquet held like a scepter, smile fixed and gleaming. I found my place 2 rows down, beside a cousin I hadn't seen in years. The photographer was shouting instructions. "Tilt in, chin down, mother of the bride, just a touch to the left." It was chaos, but polite, photogenic chaos. The kind that looks beautiful once it's cropped and filtered. At one point, someone called my name. "Hannah, Up front. We need one with both sisters. I hesitated. Blair's expression didn't change, but I saw it in her eyes, a flicker of panic, a silent recoil. I stepped carefully between heels and hems, murmuring apologies as I went. I didn't see her gown's train pulled behind her like a trap. My toe caught in the edge of it, and I stumbled only slightly but enough to bump into her shoulder. She turned on me like a switchblade. Her hand flew before either of us could think. A sharp, open slap across my cheek. A collective gasp rippled through the bridal party. The photographer lowered his camera. The birds stopped chirping, or maybe it just felt that way. I stood still, heat blooming across my face. Not from pain, but from the rawness of it. The humiliation, the betrayal. I touched my cheek. The silence around us thick as syrup. She didn't apologize. She didn't look sorry. Watch where you're going, she hissed. I looked at her then, truly looked at her, and not as my sister. Not as the girl I'd spent my life tiptoeing around, trying to please, trying to avoid provoking. I looked at her as a woman who had just publicly struck her own sibling because she couldn't stand a single moment of imperfection in her day. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just said, calm and clear, "That's fine. Just know when the venue finds out you forged a payment receipt. This wedding ends before the cake's even cut." The world didn't gasp this time. It exhaled. The moment the words left my mouth, everything tilted. Not physically, not in any dramatic movie scene way, but emotionally, atmospherically. The air itself felt thinner. The silence stretched too long, too wide, as if even the wind didn't want to be blamed for moving next. Blair stared at me, her hand still hovering midair, as if she couldn't believe I'd spoken back, let alone spoken truth. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. For most of my life, I had been the peacekeeper, the absorber, the one who swallowed pain in exchange for quiet. But something in me had shifted when she slapped me, maybe not even from the pain of it, but from the final clarity it gave me. I didn't know her my silence anymore. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly, her voice high and tight. "Oh, I think you do," I replied, not bothering to match her volume. The bridal party was frozen. I could feel their eyes darting between us, unsure of whether to intervene or retreat. Her fiancé, Adam, had stepped closer now. His smile faded into confusion. "Blair, what's she talking about?" he asked softly. Blair's face twitched. "She's making things up, trying to ruin this." I shook my head. "Actually, I was hoping I wouldn't have to say anything at all. But then you hit me, in front of everyone. So I guess here we are." I saw it then, the exact moment doubt settled into Adam's expression. A subtle narrowing of the eyes, a breath held. He turned to me. "What do you mean by forged?" I glanced at the photographer, who was now pretending to adjust his camera but clearly listening. "A friend of mine works with the venue," I said. "She flagged the payment receipt. Something about the numbers not matching." I had a look at the contract myself. Turns out Blair edited the PDF to reflect a full payment when only a deposit had been made. The rest was due last week. No one spoke. No one moved. "You're lying," Blair said, but her voice lacked the bite now. Her tone cracked on the edges. "I don't lie," I replied quietly. "I just stopped pretending." And with that, the first thread of her perfect day began to unravel, pulled not by malice, but by truth. Quiet, simple, undeniable. Blair stood as if she were carved from porcelain, beautiful, brittle, and visibly cracking. The hush that followed my confession didn't break with chaos. It didn't explode into arguments or outrage. It seeped, slow and uncomfortable, like a leak in a dam that everyone could now see and no one knew how to stop. I had only said a few words, but they were enough. A few of the bridesmaids shifted, unsure whether to step back or stand by her side. I saw one of them, Melissa, I think, nudge another and whisper something under her breath. The words didn't reach me, but I didn't need to hear them. I recognized the look. Suspicion. The kind that grows in silence. The kind Blair used to plant in others about me. Now it was blooming in reverse. Adam stepped forward, his brow tight, his voice low and strained. "Is this true?" Blair didn't answer at first. Her jaw moved, clenched and released, searching for an explanation that wouldn't sound like a confession. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I don't know what she saw, she finally said, her tone twisting into something helpless, defensive. It wasn't a big deal. I was going to fix it. Fix it, a phrase that tries to patch a lie without owning it. She's telling the truth, isn't she? Adam said, more to himself than to her. Blair turned toward him, panic finally surfacing in her eyes. I just didn't want to spend 10 grand on a venue that didn't even include catering. They were charging way more than they quoted. I thought I could buy some time. You forged a receipt, he repeated. His voice didn't rise. It just emptied. You lied to them. And to me. I stood still, not triumphant, not vengeful, just tired. Tired of keeping secrets that protected people who never once protected me. I wasn't going to say anything. I said, my voice soft. But you hit me. You humiliated me. And I'm done shrinking to keep your image intact. The shock didn't hit like thunder. It settled in the quiet, the guests looking away, the whispers starting again. The way no one quite knew where to look. Because the fairy tale had torn, and the truth was showing through the seams. And there was no way to unsee it. Blair had always been a master of optics. Since we were children, she knew how to charm a crowd, spin a story, repaint her own image. In real time. So, when the whispers started low, tight-lipped murmurs curling between flower arrangements and drifting over the lace-covered chairs, she did what she always did. She smiled, too wide, too white. The kind of smile that tries to pretend the ship isn't already halfway underwater. Oh, come on! She laughed, waving a hand through the air like she could swat the truth away. It's Hannah. She's always been a little dramatic, haven't you, sis? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. You really want to believe I'd risk my entire wedding just to save a few bucks? She continued, turning now toward the guests, her voice stretching toward casual. She's just mad I called her out for almost ruining my dress earlier. It's not a big deal. Families bicker. This is what sisters do. Except it wasn't. Not really. This wasn't a spat over a borrowed blouse or forgotten birthday. This was a fracture years in the making, split wide open in front of the people she cared most about impressing. And no amount of performance could glue it back together. Her bridesmaids stood awkwardly behind her. The silence was telling. Their eyes were restless. No one jumped in to defend her. Even the ones who used to mock me alongside her were now choosing stillness over allegiance. Adam, meanwhile, had taken a step back. Not away from her, exactly, but away from the stage she was trying to build. He rubbed a hand over his mouth, staring down at the brick path beneath his feet. He hadn't looked at me again since my reveal, but he hadn't looked at her the same way either. Blair's voice wavered as she pressed on. She's jealous. She always has been. She hates it when I'm the center of attention. My throat tightened, but I refused to look away. Jealous? I repeated, just loud enough to cut through the haze. I wanted you to have your moment, but you couldn't let me exist without punishing me for it. Even today, her expression faltered just for a second, but I saw it. The fear beneath the fury. The understanding that this time, the room wasn't on her side, and no carefully staged smile could pull it back. There's a moment, after someone loses control of the story, where time shifts. You can feel it in the silence. People stop reacting and start watching, waiting to see what happens when the lie finally runs out of road. That was where Blair stood now, on the edge of a version of herself she couldn't manage anymore. She opened her mouth again, but no words came. Her eyes flicked to her friends, then to Adam, then back to me. And for the first time all day, I didn't feel small under her gaze. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. No drama. No raised voice. Just action. Just clarity. I didn't want to make this official, I said quietly. But since you've forced it, I'm going to call the venue and have them review the contract and the receipt that was sent. It won't take long. If they find it was altered and this event is in violation of terms, legally, they'll have every right to shut it down before the reception begins. A gasp broke from someone near the front row. Blair stepped forward, panic catching in her breath. You wouldn't. I held her gaze. I would. And not because I want to ruin anything, but because you need to understand that your cruelty has consequences. You don't get to hit me, lie to everyone, and expect silence as payment. I pressed the contact for Laura, my friend who flagged the receipt in the first place. The line rang once before she picked up. Hey, I said gently, I need to confirm something for the venue team. About the Wallace wedding. Blair lunged forward to stop me, her hand reaching out, but Adam stepped between us. Don't, he said to her, voice low, calm, and final. She froze, and that's when it really happened, the shift. The illusion cracked fully this time. People no longer looked confused. They looked resigned. The ones who'd rolled their eyes at my drama were now seeing her clearly. Her mother-in-law, tight-lipped and pale. The groomsman whispering. The caterer glancing toward the coordinator. The wedding planner discreetly stepping aside to place a call of her own. I ended the call with Laura, thanked her, and slid the phone back into my bag. I never wanted it to go this far, I said, softer now. But you made it impossible not to stand up for myself. And for the first time in years, I truly meant it. The wedding didn't end with a grand announcement or the dramatic slam of church doors. It ended with a slow, awkward dissolving, like fog breaking apart under harsh sunlight. People began drifting toward the cocktail tent without direction, unsure whether to stay or leave. The music never started. The caterers stalled at the kitchen doors. The champagne flute sat untouched. Blair disappeared inside the bridal suite. She didn't say another word to me. Not one apology. Not one look. Just vanished in a blur of lace and unraveling pride. I heard later she locked herself in and refused to come out for over an hour. By then, half the guests were gone. Some said they had prior engagements. Others just couldn't bear the weight of what had happened. Adam stood quietly for a long time after everything settled. He didn't look angry, just exhausted. The way someone looks after realizing they've built a future on soft sand. He didn't follow her. And when I passed him on my way out, he nodded once, acknowledgement, maybe gratitude, maybe just disbelief. I didn't ask. It wasn't my moment to interpret. I left the venue through a side path lined with wilting hydrangeas. The sky had dulled to that pale blue that comes before a storm, and I let the wind tug at my hair as I walked. No one followed. I didn't want them to. The truth is, I didn't feel victorious. I wasn't walking away from a battle I'd won. I was walking away from a family fracture laid bare, from years of swallowing my voice to keep hers intact, from the lie I'd told myself that keeping the peace was the same as keeping love. I don't know what happens next between me and Blair. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. But for the first time, I'm not afraid of her silence. I'm not afraid of being called dramatic or difficult or too much, because I know now I was never too much. I was just never allowed to be enough. And in standing up, that day, not in anger, but in truth, I finally took back the part of myself I'd buried to keep her comfortable. Let the wedding fall apart. I am still standing, and I won't vanish again.